Okay, so we're live. This is 8 o'clock on the 8th of May, 2024. If you're watching this, you're on my profile. My name's Neil Bussey. Or you may be watching it on YouTube, so later at some point. So if you are, then my name is Neil Bussey. I'm joined this evening, and this is a novelty. I'm normally doing these presentations on my own, but I decided to change the format here and actually bring in a fellow professional. So I'm joined this evening by Gorman, and he runs a company called Think Acquisition. And this company specializes in selling businesses, but particularly property services businesses. And so we are planning to have an open discussion really around selling companies, optimizing companies. I run a fractional consultancy specializing in helping businesses to, I'd say professionalize, that's probably the wrong way to put it, but to prepare them for funding, prepare them for exit. But at any time in the sort of life cycle of the business, actually, if they wanted to shoot for best in class, then I can help with that as well. I've got a background in sort of working in PLCs and larger businesses and private companies and startups. And so I've got a bit of a varied background, and hopefully that gives me the sort of the right to have an opinion in terms of how a business could be and should be run. So without being scripted, the plan is really, and Leon, you've had experience of podcasting, so I'm more than happy for you to lead this, that we shall see where the conversation takes us around optimizing and selling businesses.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be an interesting one, and it is our first LinkedIn live together. So hopefully the people can see what they're looking to see at the moment. For me and Niels, we're just looking at each other, so we're going to have a nice conversation. We had to hold ourselves back earlier when we started finding ourselves in the rhythm of what we're going to hopefully talk about this afternoon, or this evening. So thanks for coming on so late as well for everyone here. Neil, I'm super interested to hear your side of things as well as kind of dive into my side, because what you do, whilst you can help people prepare to sell, is also optimizing for life or for whatever really what the outcome is, like you said, investment, retiring, or just maybe trying to find a nice succession plan in place. And what I do is a very small part of that, and potentially on the end of it. So there's certainly ways in which that we love it when the company has someone like you in place who has prepared the business for sale, because usually, especially the businesses that we come across, they haven't done a great deal of preparation, if any, even if they had been considering it for a while. So yeah, there's quite a few topics we'd like to cover. One of the things I wanted to touch on first was around the topic of, do people really want to sell their business, or do people just want an easier life? So the question is to you initially, is that when people come to you, why are they looking for help? What are they actually looking for?
Yeah, I guess, in the SME space, and like any for-profit business, people are looking to make more money. They may come with an agenda around you helping them with certain things on the fringes, but normally it involves sort of digging deep into the business. And I think it's just a good exercise to have external views, whether it's colleagues or people in working groups and networking groups or whatever it is, to sort of get a sort of take on your business, an external take, because people tend to be very close to it, especially in SME businesses or owner managers running companies. And you talk about businesses, having any, I guess I don't want to do you out of any business, but you're saying sometimes people come to you and your advice might be, maybe you shouldn't sell your business, maybe you should just do something different with it. Mm-hmm. And that may be the case, and I have sort of reflected on that as well myself. But I guess if you're going to do that, you have to sort of paint yourself out of the business. And my observation has been, and really up to sort of very large businesses, is that the people at the top who are running those companies tend to have a lot of detail around what's going on, and so maybe that's not what people on this call want to hear. That you want to be able to sort of lift yourself out and take yourself out of the business. But right up to sort of PLC level, I've been in a boardroom with the chief exec of a PLC, and he's asking me about £1,000 expenditure for a £400 million company on page 15 of the financial report, and his accountants, his entourage, are sort of flicking through the paperwork. And I'm thinking, this guy's doing the detail on something which has no material effect on the business. And maybe it's because he just wants to know that I know. But I think as well that there's, in any size organization, large or small, there's somebody really doing the detail who's got skin in the game. And if you want to paint yourself out of the company, somebody else needs to be there to do that. So I think this whole idea of systemizing it and then sort of getting out, it kind of works to a certain extent, but somebody has to be there really holding it to account in terms of professionalism and integrity and that level of detail. And they have to have skin in the game, whether that means you have to cede equity to somebody as you sort of try and back yourself out of it. But I don't see necessarily that there's a way to sort of just completely, isolate yourself.
It's very rare, especially within the SME market and the micro and small businesses. The business owner is the driving force. Whatever their position is in the business, they are often the driving force of the business. So putting together a succession plan is difficult. But when we work with our clients, it's more so demonstrating to the next buyer what value there is and what value can be transferred. And hopefully there is a management team in place that can potentially take on additional responsibilities, move through the ranks and grow. But ultimately, it's very rare, especially in our circumstances, to see that one person that could take full managing director role that would handle all responsibilities, especially without an equity play involved in it. If that's a little bit of a different story then. But when there is a fantastic management team, usually management buyout might be an option. Whilst we don't necessarily specialize in them, that can be a suitable option. A lot of times people don't go for the MBOs because one, they would usually want a bigger price because there can be a better price on the open market. But two, because there's not naturally a good enough management team in place who the director is happy to give the full reins to. So yeah, that's kind of what I've seen, and generally why people come to me to sell. Often it's retiring, and I think some are retiring very late. We've had clients up to, I have one at the moment that's 79 years old, still running the business, still plowing through. And I didn't even really know until I'd done my due diligence of how old they were. So they're doing very well. But then on the opposite side of things, there's business owners of kind of 50 years old who've had enough. And I don't really think, and I like your opinion on this, I don't really think they're ready to stop. I just think that the business they've been running for the last 10, 20 years, they've just had enough of, whether it's not providing enough profit for them to be warrant the effort, or they're spending too much time in the business, or they're handling little stresses that they shouldn't really need to. And that's where I would love to recommend a coach or a consultant or operations director to come in and help them take that stress away, because then they might actually want to run the business for the next 5 years and reap the rewards. Do you think that's a potential angle?
Yeah, for sure. You can get trapped in your own business, can't you? Maybe that's the 79-year-old you're dealing with. You can imagine you just can't let go. You just don't know what would happen to it if you let go. So yeah, absolutely. You have to think about, growth is the mantra, I suppose, for SME businesses or for any business. But you've got to be thinking about where you want the business to be ultimately and work backwards from there. Because I think growth on its own, and I'm sure I'll get shot down for this and people disagree, but I think growth on its own is kind of an empty metric. There's momentum around growth, which helps you in other ways. But you have to have a clear idea about what you want. Sometimes clients, I'll be talking with them about, this is the state of your business today. Where do you want the business to go? And sometimes growth is not necessarily what they want. They don't want more of a headache, or they perceive more of a headache. We can be twice the size and make half the margin and be sitting on the same net profit. Do we want that, or do we want to stay where we are? It really depends who the shareholders are and who the stakeholders are. But I do very much like the idea of, and it's written about a lot. There's books like Profit First and others where they talk about, working with the end in mind backwards, and rather than profit being an afterthought, that you actually put profit at the start, and you say, okay, a business like this should make X amount of EBIT. It should be 20%, 15, whatever it is. You put some science behind it, and then you work backwards all the way up to your revenue, and that dictates what your overhead should be, what your costs in your business should be, and then you have to have an honest look at that and say, well, are these appropriate or not? And you can restructure the business to then make the profit that it should be making. And if you do that, then you can reinvest profits into expansion, into R&D, into putting people into position that means that you can actually step out of it a little bit. And I've been involved with turnarounds where you're making no money and you've got no cash and it's stressful. And I've been involved in highly profitable companies. And the difference in your psyche and the difference in the enjoyment of running a company when you don't know how to pay the wages next week versus one where you've got cash in the bank, you've got options. And the whole timeline around that is that you can look strategically. So you can be thinking about next year, next 3 years, rather than the next 24 hours, the next week, the next month. And those are the things that wake you up at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's not where you want to be. And if my job is to help companies, not companies in distress necessarily, but companies that want to optimize themselves so they get out of that short-term tactical operating into sort of medium, long-term strategic thinking, because it's just more fun to run businesses that way, and that's what we're here to do, really. I mean, you want to enjoy yourself when you only pass this way once. You want to enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And again, on the small end of the scale, something that we see very often is that even up to 2 million in revenue, there can still be a very small amount of profit, and that's maybe not even adjusted for the director's salary. You know, most directors at the moment are paying themselves a very low salary for tax reasons. But then if you look at their dividends too, they may not even be drawing out much dividends. You know, they're working an equivalent of a £80,000 or £100,000 job, and they're paying themselves £30,000. You know, plus they're carrying the responsibility of a team of 20 or 30 people. And whilst that's not the image for all businesses, there is a substantial amount of businesses out there that are operating in that way. It's sad to see, especially when they're 10, 15, 20 years in. They've done a lot of hard work. They've built a great reputation. They're award winning. You know, they've done so many of the right things, but sometimes they haven't quite looked at the operations and the finance of the business. And I believe that that's where maybe an external person like yourself can ask the hard questions, you know, reset their reality and show them that what they have built is great. And how do you capitalize on that? And my kind of follow-up question to that topic is, why do you think the business owners don't want to work with business coaches or consultants or assistants, really? That's the kind of feedback that I often get, especially when they need it most, when they're not quite profitable. And I think that's a bit of a struggle.
I think there's a lot of noise out there, which makes it difficult. I think you're trying to cut through that. You know, when you engage with somebody to help on your business is your baby. You know, you're talking about situations there where people are taking small salaries and small dividends out of a company, and they're kind of trapped in there because I'm not trying to attract turnaround companies to work with. You know, I can work with profitable companies, but you know, in a situation like that, you know, there's a lot of workers that are relying on you. You can't go anywhere. If you're going to take external advice, it's very personal, isn't it? You know, you're opening up the sort of finances to someone from external to look at it. But you know, the traditional view as you do things in house. You know, 25 years ago when I started out, you know, you're just starting out with the internet. So business support and running a company is based on the resources that are immediately available to you now. Now you can reach out around the world. I had an inquiry this morning from Tasmania. You know, people, you know, you talk to people, they can tap into resources wherever they happen to be in the world. And so your business can, you know, it's unlikely that your business is going to contain all of the best talent around all of these different disciplines in-house. So why not reach out on a fractional basis and tap into these things? But there's so much noise out there. I get inundated all the time. If you set up a business and you register on Companies House, you immediately start getting letters from accountants and people who want to do your tax return for you. And before you know it, you know, you register a domain and an email address, and you're just getting flooded with things. And so within that, I'm sure there are lots of reputable people, and there's lots of people, but there's also the snake oil salespeople, and there's the people selling you miracles, and you know, you just kind of, it all gets lost in the mix. And so you have to develop trust, I suppose, with organizations. They have to see you and get a sense of what you can do before they're going to sort of welcome you and actually look at something which is really emotionally, you know, attached for them.
Yeah, I think in our both our lines of work really is that a referral relationship is really important. For someone to be referred into working with you based on a positive experience, they kind of need that, because most business owners are very busy. They don't have time to filter through, like you said, all the spam, the letters, the emails, you know, all the ones I send, and you know, they do well work, but it's a very small few, and I get fortunate to hit them at the right time. So reality is, like you said, to go out and find the right person to transform their business, being such a personal move, and it's going to cost them money, you know, especially if they're not quite where they want to be. You know, they want to take more salary, but maybe they can't afford to, so they need to first invest it. You know, they might have got stuck there, but like you said, hopefully the businesses that are coming to you are super profitable, and money's not a problem there. But the next thing is trust, isn't it? You know, the last thing they want to do is invest time, money, and energy making changes to their business, potentially, which you're probably going to advise them to make changes that they may well disagree with. And they need to first know that you are who you say you are before you do so. And I imagine it is quite hard to break that boundary before actually engaging in proving your worth. I think you noted before some a method that you're able to demonstrate your value. Would you be happy to share that on here?
Yeah. I mean, what I normally do is you know, get on a call with a prospective client or somebody who has an interest in optimizing their business, and you know, dip the toe, if you like, and actually just do a bit of a diagnostic where we can actually do a piece of work to understand what the priorities are in the business. So rather than engaging in some long-term commitment, actually just do a piece of work, and from which will hopefully come value and priorities that we could then sort of work on together, or not. As a standalone piece of work, is something you can say, well, there you go. It's a way for you to sort of engage on a short-term basis and actually sort of see whether there's value to be had there. So that's generally how I sort of approach. And it's a very consultative approach, just as a doctor would diagnose a patient before they're prescribing any sort of solution. It's exactly the same exercise. You want to go in and have a deep dive into this and look and see what's going on, and then make a series of recommendations. And they can maybe agree or disagree at that point and walk away, or they can say, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, how do we actually deploy that? How do we make it happen? So I guess my question to you on that would be, I'm helping companies to optimize, but sometimes it's because they want to make more money, they want to stay in the business. Sometimes it's because they want to sell. If they want to sell, how soon would they need to be thinking about that before they come to you?
I would say at least, if ideally, we there's a term, think about selling your business when you start it, and that's not always ideal for most people. Some people do have that in mind, a build to exit, but for the vast majority of people, that is not the intention of why they set up a business. So in reality, a 3-year timeline for a smaller business, we'd be very happy with, as long as they were keen to implement the strategies to start making meaningful change. Most buyers are going to look at the last 2 or 3 years as the main focus, provided nothing crazy has happened. Of course, the previous years are important, but if something drastic has changed over the last, in like 5 years ago, it's less important, providing it's not got any kickback. So when we speak to some of our clients, and even an 18-month timeline can really help. So for example, let's just say a property management company, because we love property management companies and they're quite a big part of our client base. One thing that they can do really quite easily is to make sure all their contracts are correct and make sure that they're charging as much as possible on their management fees, because the next buyer is buying those contracts. And if there's good management fees on those contracts, they're buying more valuable contracts. We recently had a holiday let company, and their break clauses were only a 2-month break with all of their clients. So the buyer could essentially buy the business, and they could all serve notice, the next day. And then 2 months later, all the contracts could be gone. So what they could do is work with their clients to have 12-month contracts, which is not uncommon within their space. So a small change like that changes the value of a contract being 2 months of revenue to 12 months worth of revenue. And it's a very minor change. But some of those things you can't necessarily do just before you go to market. You can't just get all your landlords signed up to a new contract and then sell. I mean, there's nothing necessarily stopping you, but it could potentially decrease the amount of trust you have in all the goodwill you have in your clients, so that then when they do change, they're in more of a state to think, okay, let's move now, because we're not very happy with kind of, maybe we feel like we've been played as part of this business sale process. So yeah, there's a lot to it. I think 3 years is nice, earlier if possible. A big one is finances and data. So if they don't have the time and they're in a bit of a situation where they kind of want to do it in the next 18 months, a year, or even less so, next 6 months, we've definitely had some clients kind of say, I need to sell in 4 months. And like, that is a bit of a tight timeline. That's not necessarily very easy, not impossible. But what you can do is, if you haven't got the time, is backdate as much data as possible. So like for us, when you're going to do a business sale, data is important. When you say data, it covers a wide topic, but for simple things, KPIs and finances, those two ones are massive. And if you can demonstrate quality management accounts, whilst yes, you will maybe only have the next 3 months because that's when you decided, you may be able to backdate it with the information you've got, and that will become extremely valuable when you're going into the sale process.
I guess it's the quality as well of the finances, because you talk about hard metrics, and so outside of publicly listed companies, I guess private businesses are sold pretty much on a multiple of earnings, as long as all the other stuff is in place, as a thumbsuck, I suppose, as a kind of a gauge. But what you're talking about there is, you could have a company that's got a particular level of earnings, 2 companies side by side. One of them's got all their contracts with a 2-month break clause in them, and the other one's got them all with a 12-month. And hopefully it'll be picked up on due diligence. But the actual my point is that the finances alone only gives part of the story. And what I would like to do, if a company was going to be sold, and I might be being naive here, I can help people get their earnings in shape and get all of their management accounts and everything else in shape. But I would have thought that a buyer A shrewd buyer is looking for an opportunity. They want to see upside here. They want to take the company and they want to do something with it that the current owners couldn't do. They want to diversify. They want to go into a different market. They want to expand it. They want to do something with it, and they can see an opportunity that is underutilized. But if you can just put that under the nose of a buyer and say, well, there's the finances, all of the hygiene stuff is in place. But on top of that, yes, we haven't expanded into this market because we do, and there's a reason for it, but it's there for the taking. Then suddenly, the multiples of earnings goes out the window, and it becomes an emotional purchase, and you can start to create some competition around. There's a diamond here to sell, And this is not the space I operate in, but that's the sort of that's where my mind is going with it.
Yeah, you're very right. Creating that narrative is a very important part of the process. And there's a key part to it, though, because a lot of our clients, especially when we're going through the discovery phase, when we ask them questions like, what are the growth opportunities for the business at a very early stage? They may well say, oh, you could just spend more on Facebook ads, or we could expand into that area. Or, well, if we hired a sales director, our business would triple. And it's like, well, okay, that sounds great, but why have you not done it yourself? Let's play into that, because there's so many things as a business owner you could say you will do and that you could do that would equal X. But if it's that amazing, why haven't you done it? And there's got to be, like you said, there's got to be a very good reason for it, and a demonstrably good argument that would allow the next buyer to do so. It's quite interesting on the small end of the market in what you say, because the growth opportunity may not be the same for everyone. We're currently representing a couple of state letting agents, and each buyer coming from a slightly different angle may see different value within that business. So as a broker, whilst we create a narrative within the information memorandum and the marketing material, it's also about understanding the buyer's criteria and the buyer's needs and desires at a very early stage, so that then we can start to spin the story to what they want. If, for example, we had an estate letting agent that were selling lots of investment type properties, they didn't think they did investment type properties, but my buyer was heavily involved with the investment property world. So he saw a massive opportunity to pick up all their leads and flip them into much higher earning fees than what they currently were. So I did a little bit of Excel grinding for the buyer, just to demonstrate, look, if you managed to take even 20% of these houses and did what you currently do in your business with it, you would increase your revenue by 2.5x, I think it was, at a very small level, therefore increasing the revenue by 75% within the first year. Just trying to demonstrate that. And then, like you said, whilst you've got average industry EBITDA multiples, the buyer might say, yes, the total consideration is 3x, but to him, it's not. To him, it might be 5x, because the EBITDA could be completely different once he's acquired the business. So it's certainly a very tailored and bespoke kind of industry when you're looking at buyers and sellers. It's not like buying an investment property. It's not as straightforward by no means.
No, it sounds like we're saying the same thing. It sounds like you're talking about selling the upside within the sale process rather than just selling the history of the company, which is kind of, I think what I'm getting at is you're trying to sell potential, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to touch on that, we work with a lot of companies who've got 40, 50 plus years of trading. And a lot of the time, there is value in that. It does demonstrate that you've run a successful business over the past. And whilst there is value, really, they're looking at the future of the business, right? If the business is only 3 years old, but they can see a great future for it, that might hold more value than having a 100-year-old business that's about to die. So yeah, it's really nice to see a well-established business with, consistent, successful earnings. It definitely demonstrates a lot of value, but it doesn't necessarily allow you to just add a couple of digits onto the multiple.
No, absolutely. No, it's I guess in that sense, the owners of the business have to be very clear on how they're creating value and profit. Do you have to coach them in front of actual prospective buyers? Because I could imagine sales going south if a company owner says the wrong thing at the wrong time.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of preparation, let's say, and that happens. We try and get as much preparation done as possible before we even go to market. So we get on the same page in terms of the narrative and story that we're selling, because like you said, the last thing you want to do is get into, close to heads of term stage when you're negotiating potential indicative offers, and they're trying to sell a story that's not necessarily applicable to buyers, but to them it means a lot. For that, it's their business. They feel like this is the best thing that a buyer will value from their business, but they don't necessarily have the same mindset as a buyer would, because they're in a completely different perspective. So we take a lot of time in terms of preparing them to understand which direction is best to take and which story we're going to go down. And if there's any red flags or potential areas of concern, what are the objection handlers for each one of those? And let's all be very clear on why this is the way it is, and let's have a truthful story, because I must emphasize that it must be a truthful story. It's in our practice anyway. We don't educate for clients to lie or deceive. It has to be honesty, because it will eventually come out in due diligence if there's a string of lies along the way.
Absolutely. No, I guess I'm talking about sort of the quality of the earnings and the clarity around. Even if a company wasn't being sold, I would want to know that the owners of the business understand how they're creating value and sort of monetizing it. There are clients I deal with where they've got big product lines, and we're really struggling to dig down into it and understand the profitability of the business and some of the key metrics and where money's being spent. I'm thinking if you want to optimize that, we need to understand it. If you wanted to sell the business and sell it to somebody on the idea that they were actually going to go and do something new with it, they would want to understand it. So these things they go beyond the pure financials. It goes into all the stuff that surrounds that as you approach a sale.
Yeah, it definitely does. And again, on the smaller end, a lot of small businesses offer a wide array of services when they don't really need to. They have done, I believe, because they've saw an opportunity, taken it on, and now they're a £1 million turnover business with 7 service lines, and they're all making a very small amount of money in relatively. So that actually could be damaging their business, because when you ask them, which service is most profitable for you, where are your resources going? Where are you actually getting these leads from? And what does the future look like within each of these industries? A lot of the time they don't know. All they know is they're collecting sales, paying their staff, paying their expenses, and somehow ending up with enough to take a small salary and think, yes, we've managed to get through without making a loss. And I think that's a very strong reality for many, many business owners, especially on the small end. I really wish there was more amazing accountants that were able to facilitate and help a lot of these business owners. I really do think accountants and FDs can make a really big difference to a business just by digging into the details, or maybe even like yourself, to dig into the details, understand the reality of what they're actually providing, what value they're providing to their customers and how they're getting them, and what that looks like. And to a buyer, that's dreamy. We're trying to onboard a client at the moment, and the MD is also their FD, and he's amazing. His accounts are fantastic. That's exactly what we want to see, because it makes our life a lot easier. Whereas on the other hand, we may onboard a client who's sending us an email with their turnover, operating profit, and their salary. And I'm like, no, we need we need detailed finances here. It's our job essentially to educate them why, and also how to go and get those finances. I often find myself in people's Xero accounts and Sage, and trying to work with the accountant to get the right information, because sadly there are also some accountants who also don't understand this process. So I don't feel like I'm educating them, because I'm not an accountant, but at least I'm educating them on what we're looking for, right? Because sometimes they don't know what data we're looking for and why we might need it. So to answer your question, it's very important, and a big part of what we do is to help them through every stage, and sometimes ask the hard questions like, why are you doing that? It's not making you any money. I know you've been doing it for the last 5 years, but you should probably stop.
There's a lot of businesses like that where you sort of collect services, like you said, and it's funny because these days there's so many resources available to companies that, to be successful in business, you kind of have to specialize on something, because if you don't, then someone's going to beat you to it. Generalists is kind of, that's the preserve of Amazon and these big marketplaces these days. Being a generalist doesn't generally work for an SME. You kind of have to sort of be a specialist in a particular thing. And again, sometimes I see SME clients who don't fully understand what it is that makes them different from everybody else. It's normally a combination of things. It might be sort of the network and a particular sort of technical skill set, and a reach and a combination of things, which all folded together puts them in the right place at the right time to deliver something in a way that nobody else can. But then if you get pulled out of shape and you start doing all sorts of things and diversify, You think it's going to protect you in some way, but the reality is it can make you really unwieldy then, and actually being lean is kind of better. Although having said that, and I would counter that by saying that there's no business I've worked with that sort of decades earlier was doing exactly the same thing. They all have to evolve. You specialize in something, but then you're not very adaptable, so you have to specialize. But then when the market moves, you've got to be open to the idea of actually changing what you do. And all the businesses I've worked for that have been successful have actually demonstrated that over a period of time. But they're outliers. The majority of businesses, because I think we spoke earlier, and I said that the average age of a business in the UK is 8.5 years. And so actually businesses that are around for a long time, are a rarity. And it's generally because they do exactly what you described. They sort of start grabbing services and doing all sorts of things and get out of shape and get unprofitable and get away from what made them a decent business in the first place. And then they can't recover it. And then they just go into decline, and you get a churn, and there's a few 100,000 businesses created every year, a few 100,000 businesses in the UK disappear every year, and it sits there about 5.5 million businesses, and you think they're all the same businesses, but they're not. There's just this churn going on, and you just don't see it day to day. So
it's an incredible churn, because they're part of our lead generation process to find clients ourselves. We filter based on company age. Typically, we don't work with companies less than 4 years old. They need to be fairly well established. Not saying we wouldn't consider it, but it's quite rare. And just seeing the stats of how many businesses are available which are like 20 years old is very small. And it just shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. Whereas over the last 4 years, I would hazard a guess that 80% of businesses were created in the last 5 years. That's a complete guess, but there is a considerable amount on Companies House, and a lot of the limited companies there aren't actual businesses. That they're just kind of ideas, I guess, aren't they?
Yeah, no, that's true, and you're right with the statistics. It's about 1 in 10 businesses are over 20 years old, and so 90% are under that age. And it's around half are 4 years or under. So by not dealing with businesses that are 4 years or under, you're cutting out half the market. But I understand exactly why you do that. There's still plenty to go after. So
one thing I wanted to ask, and to tap into your senior expertise, because you have played a role in some really large companies across the world as well, which is quite a cool thing, a nice thing to say, on multi-continent anyway. Being at the helm of some of those large companies, what have you seen that makes all of them successful? What's the one thing that they all do that allows them to continue operating?
They all understand about how to create value and monetize value. I think I don't want to do any of them a disservice, but I think sometimes it's timing. And some of the businesses I've worked for have been around a long time, and you can see how they kind of set up in a different time and have evolved, and it's taken them decades to get to sort of where they are. And the market that we operate in today would be different to sort of launch into, and you need an awful lot of capital to sort of to make it successful now. What worked then wouldn't necessarily work now. I think there's always leadership, whether it's a £2 million turnover business or a £400 million turnover business. There's always senior people who are doing the detail on things. And I was surprised as I sort of went up through bigger and bigger organizations that was always the case. There was always somebody who was reaching right down. And I think you can't afford not to do that. They talk in management about, you have to be able to delegate and step away from things. You get to the point where you can't sort of touch on this stuff. But I have observed that happen. But there's people at the top who are very interested in the detail and are also very sales focused. All the businesses I've worked in that have been successful have been inordinately interested in sales. And you kind of think sales is one function, and there's other bits of the business. You work in the business, there's other bits on the front end, etc. But those businesses, everybody is kind of indoctrinated with the idea that you are contributing to sales. And as an engineer coming into that as a graduate, I'm thinking, well, this is not my bag. I do the technical bit, but actually in business, if you want to be successful, everybody is selling in there, and you kind of come around to that idea. And so, I would say a sales focus. Everything. I think Daniel Priestley says everything else is downstream of that. Once you've got demand, you can solve for everything else. If your business has demand, everything else is solvable. So
I would agree, and I think that's what a lot of small businesses miss out on. I don't think they're focused enough on the sales, because usually the director, the key two people who may have set up the business, and usually one of them might be the sales type person, has been taken over by managerial type roles and kind of managing the entire company, and not necessarily focusing on bringing new businesses continually, and maybe haven't hired themselves out because they're the person who goes to the meetings, does the networking, brings in a lot of the value for the company. I see it across loads of the businesses that we're working with right now, just thinking through them. Normally there's one person who's bringing in a lot of the business, but they're also preoccupied by many of the other business activities. And if they were able to take all that extra stress away and just focus on new business, they'd probably be a lot more successful. They probably would be. But yeah, that's a super interesting one. I think I had that consideration, I guess, within marketing. If you've got enough leads and then you can convert them to sales, then sales equals money, and money can solve a lot of business problems, right? If you can charge a high premium, you've got a high profit margin, you can hire well, and there's, like you just said, it's a trickle down effect. And what about the opposite side then? You've seen a lot of big businesses. What do you see that restricts their growth and maybe decreases their productivity?
I think it's the adaptability, to be honest. I think you've got to be able to take an honest look at your company and where it is. I think sometimes people are very emotionally attached to it, and they think that everybody knows about their business, that it kind of becomes all consuming. But people don't really care about anybody else's business. It's just a transactional thing, and so if you get absorbed into that, then you can run into sort of keeping it where it was. And I've worked in some bigger organizations, like $100 million sort of organization, not big, but where kind of had a clear identity, and then did exactly what you described, started adding services on, adding bits on here, bits on there. Before you know it, they've just got a smorgasbord of offerings, half of which don't sort of really tie into what their sort of core skill set is. And then they're getting commoditized, and they're getting sort of beaten up in different areas because they're fighting on fronts that they just shouldn't be fighting on. And you have to sort of come back and say, right, let's reset here. What are we good at here? How do we win? And you get back to sort of your core principles and what actually makes you successful. I was toying with the idea of sort of sharing an example there, but it involves I had an example in Australia where a very technical company selling technical products, but we got into all sorts of different products that we were supplying. But a lot of them, we were coming under pressure from China, because China was just importing products, and these were supposedly technical products. And we realized we couldn't compete with the Chinese on this. We couldn't compete with the pricing, and it was a heavily unionized manufacturing market in Australia. So it was expensive for labor. In China, they were just churning this stuff out and sending it over. And so if we went toe to toe, we would lose. And so we ended up having to set up a center of excellence on the Gold Coast and a laboratory, and start selling on selling risk, if you like, as opposed to selling large volumes. And so we were selling into applications, into landfill and into mining, where there was risk mitigation required. So we were taking, we were working with designers, and we were selling on technical excellence, and we were able to command a premium, and we took the fight away from the commodity space where it was. And if we hadn't done that, we'd have lost. And so, you stray away. It's very tempting because there's big volumes available, but at the same time, the margin wasn't there, and we weren't set up to compete. And if you get away from that, if you get away from what you're good at, so being able to adapt and being able to stick to what you're good at, but adapt as required as the market changes. If you can't do that, then that's why I'm sure companies don't get to 10 years. Most of them don't get there because they do this thing. They get on board with the latest thing. They sell something. They realize some success, and then they don't adapt as required, and then it just goes on the wane, and eventually they just fade away and off they go. And that cycle is a well-trodden path, I think.
Yeah, I definitely see that pattern. With new tech, new grants, new government initiatives, new people, new ideas. There's always going to be something that has a timeline to it, right? And maybe that 10 years is the sweet spot when it starts to run dry if it doesn't stay. Some businesses are fortunate, maybe like some of the ones you mentioned earlier. They found something, they grew into it, and they were lucky that the industry just stuck around, and it's still going strong. Or maybe they did adapt and grow into what they needed to. But I think that's a really interesting point, and a really good answer to that question. And to help the people watching, knowing that in their business, whilst what they're doing now may well be doing very well for them, but knowing that at any moment, adapting and working with someone potentially to assist them in capturing the next opportunity and making sure that next opportunity is the right one to drive it. And the beautiful thing is, to cut myself off then, you've got the resources then to actually chase something meaningful. Whereas when you're starting a business, it's a lot more difficult to build the resources and build the team, build the business. But fortunately, when you're in a good space and you see an opportunity, you should have the necessary resources to invest in the people, the time, the actual maybe assets to move into an industry and to dominate quite quickly. But you don't see that too often. I don't think you do.
No, it's being able to lift that view from that short-term tactical into the strategic. But if you haven't got the money to do it, then when opportunity knocks, you can't take that opportunity. And it happens in big business as well. I'm reading about Superdry, and 15 years ago, men of my age were wearing Superdry, and now I'm still wearing it, but the market's moved away. No one wants to wear it anymore. And they would probably realize 15, 20 years ago, that they should have realized, this isn't going to last forever. I think he thought it was going to be like Nike or something. But the reality is that fashion, which is not my specialty, but it is fickle, and it moves on. And so what's the next thing? Whilst you're reaping all the rewards, they must have made a fortune on the back of that. But now they're being refinanced, and they're going into administration, and the future of the company is pretty uncertain. And that was a big organization, because it's moved. And maybe I'm being unfair, but what were they thinking 10 years ago when they're making this money? Well, what's next? This is not going to last. This is going to dry up. We're going to need to be ready. And I don't see the evidence of that, unfortunately. So it's not just small businesses this happens to. Everybody's affected by the market in the same way.
So I got one last question for you, Neil, because we're coming up to our time. What do you think clients are actually looking for when they reach out to someone like yourself? What do you think what are they looking for? Are they looking for money? Are they looking for freedom? Are they looking just to pass their stress over to you? What do you think they actually want? And what do you think you actually find out that they really do actually need?
It can be any number of things. It can be family businesses, it can be political, or it can just be purely sort of financial, or it can be, like you said, owners who are trapped in businesses and want to sort of extricate themselves and have more freedom and have more enjoyment and work more strategically, and basically take something which they've created and have it realize its full potential, and see that happen whilst within their working life. What you end up getting into is, you have to gauge. It's good to do a diagnostic exercise, because you get into, am I working with somebody who's open-minded to this? That's the other thing I see, and I didn't mention that. When you work with successful companies, is they're super open-minded. They're happy to look in the mirror and go, okay, well, this is working, this is not working. Because if a business owner comes to you and says, I need help, I want to make more money, and you make a series of recommendations, we say that this is working, that's not working right now, and they don't accept that, then you've got nowhere to move. So you're looking for people who are open-minded, and hopefully people who seek external help are the ones who actually want to be the 1%. They want to be the outliers, the ones that are successful, and so they would be open-minded. That's not always the case, but so what are they looking for? Probably full realization of their business. What it involves is something that you have to be open-minded about. That could look like anything. It's going to be tailored to the individual. I don't have a cookie cutter approach to helping a business. I don't think that a small business should be run like a PLC. I don't think that a PLC should be run like a startup. So there's something that's going to be appropriate to every business that's out there. The fundamentals are the same. You lift the bonnet on a company, and there's a P&L, and there's a cash flow, there's a balance sheet, and the mechanics of making money and creating value and monetizing it is kind of the same across the world. But what's appropriate for running a business is really down to that particular business. So it's you can't sort of throw a blanket over it and say that's the approach you should take. So hence why they should talk to you and they should talk to me, because I can't give you a flyer or a book and say that's the way to do it. It's really very specific.
Yeah, of course. It is a big game of asking questions, a lot of questions, and sometimes quite intrusive at an early stage. But I'm sure you do it too. We often have regular conversations where we can't help. We're not the right people to assist them in that journey, whether they're just not in the right position to sell, whether selling isn't actually what they wanted to do. They just needed to have a conversation with someone about possible options. The various things where we might pass them on to someone else to speak to, because it's not always what they're looking for when they make the contact. But we were saying earlier, it makes me very happy when I have a discovery call with someone and I'm able to help them. And I can genuinely see in their face that they've made a realization, just by sometimes not even from me telling them or anything, just by them talking about what they needed to talk about to someone outside of their company. And they have that realization, whether they work with us now or in the future or never, it still just makes me happy. And there's also the time waster ones too, but we're quite good at vetting them through, and ultimately, we're happy to share value wherever possible. We know it will come around in all shapes or forms, and ultimately, I think the small business market, especially the sellers, lack a massive education on selling businesses. I think buyers have obviously way more education than the sellers. Hence, one of the reasons why we chose to be sell-side advisors. We want to represent the person who's least represented in a way. When you're going into a negotiation, typically the buyers are going to be far more experienced than you, one, in business, and two, in acquisitions. So if it's your first and only time and you get approached directly from one potential buyer, it's very, very unlikely that that's the best deal that you could get, and that you'll be treated right all the way through. So rather than working for the buy side and trying to squeeze the best deal possible out of the seller, we'd rather work for sell side and try and squeeze the best deal out of the buyers, and try and get the best price for the sellers, because ultimately it probably will be one of the only opportunities they have to sell a business. They want to make it as large and as special as possible, whereas the buyers are probably going to go on to acquire multiple more, and if that one's not suited, they'll move on. So I sometimes get some dislike from buyers. As much as I love the acquirers, I like business owners who are looking to acquire. We get on very well, but when I tell them their price isn't high enough, they often get annoyed because they want a good deal. So that's part of the game we play.
But like you said, your job for me to optimize a business, for you to actually create some competition around buying that business and people understanding what the opportunity is and getting the highest price you can, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think I allowed half an hour. We've done 3/4 of an hour, so I guess we should probably wrap it up there, Leon. But thank you for joining me. It made a pleasant change from my normal format of actually just delivering the presentation. So I enjoyed that, and I appreciate the questions and talking to you.
No, it was an absolute pleasure. We should definitely do some more of these. Whilst, like I said, I don't know if anyone's watched. I don't know if anyone's enjoyed. If you have watched, feel free to drop me a DM to let us know if you found any value. If you have any follow-up questions, obviously I'm welcome to answer any. Always helping people in my LinkedIn DMs as much as possible. But yeah, thanks for setting this up, Neil. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, likewise. I shall. I'll finish the feed there, but I'll drop you a DM as well. But thanks for your time, and thanks everyone for joining us. We shall see you around.
Thanks.